Thank you for listening to Mormon Sex Info. This episode is an archived episode and is only now becoming publicly available. Mormon Sex Info relies on contributions. To contribute, please visit mormonsex.info. And now, please enjoy this episode.
Hello and welcome to Mormon Sex Info. This is Natasha Helfer-Parker. We're super excited to have a Mormon Sex Info podcast tonight where I have some of my favorite colleagues joining me tonight for a panel discussion that we're going to be talking about the new web page on LDS.org that is addressing pornography, and it seems like it just recently came out. So I have Braxton Detson with me and Shannon Hickman. Before we get started, just a quick reminder, you can go to mormonsex.info.com to find all the content. Currently, there's a subscription and kind of way to pay for podcasts that will be probably changing, but please consider becoming a subscriber, or once we change it kind of more to a donation type status, because that's the only way that I can keep the podcast going is to be, have it be somewhat financially sustainable. So I definitely want to keep this very important topic going. And I've had some really great people who are willing to come on the show who are authors and, people who really have a lot of national, international credibility that have been willing to come because they're really excited to talk to an audience such as our community. So anyway, want to keep it going. So help support me in that. Anybody who is interested in a faith transition retreat, which I'll be running with Dan Witherspoon this coming weekend in the Salt Lake City area, March 1st through 3rd, please visit my website, natashaparker.org. For more information. This is a really good setting for people who are wanting to maybe stay involved in Mormonism, but maybe feel less orthodox or feel like they feel difficulty in fitting in. It's also a great retreat for those who are in mixed faith marriages or mixed faith family relationships. We've had all of those people come in the past, so gotten always really good reviews. So if you could make that work, it's very affordable for a weekend retreat, and we'd love to invite you to join us. Okay, so Braxton and Shannon, before we get started, why don't you both just briefly introduce yourselves? You've both been on the show before, so I kind of have my certified sex therapist in Mormon land that I love to invite on an ongoing basis. So just both of you take turns telling us a little bit who you are and what you're doing, and then we'll dive into the topic.
Sure. So thanks for having me on again, Natasha. My name is Shannon Hickman, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I'm also an ASECT certified sex therapist, and I have a private practice in Murray, Utah called Core Healing Counseling, where I primarily do sex therapy, but I also am a Gottman-trained therapist, and I work a lot with couples and individuals.
Thank you, Shannon. Braxton?
All right, I'm Braxton Detson. I'm a certified sex therapist in Salt Lake City, Utah as well. And I work at the Healing Group. I see couples, individuals, and teenagers there, all dealing with sexual issues that come up. And I also host Birds and Bees podcast. I'm the host there, where I teach parents and couples about intimacy, as well as we focus mostly on being able to talk to your kids about sexual health, how to start that, topics, things you might run into, creating a community there. And I'm excited to be back here talking with you, Natasha. This is a lot of fun. I work with a lot of LDS individuals, and whether they're transitioning or out or all the way in, anywhere in between, I love working with the LDS population. It's a passion of mine.
Awesome. Yeah. And so if anybody's watching or joining us interactively here on Facebook Live, please feel free to ask us questions along the way or make comments or give us kind of your insights on, some of the things that we're talking about. Now, Braxton, you were the one who brought this page to my attention. I was like, where have I been? Have I been like asleep at the wheel? And all of a sudden, you're talking about a whole new webpage. And I guess I was only a few weeks asleep at the wheel. So could you tell me a little bit about what you know about when this page came on the scene?
Yeah, so it's I don't know the exact date. I should have looked that up. However, it's only been maybe a month and a half that this page is launched. And I stumbled across it because I was researching LDS.org for pornography. The main reason I was looking it up is because I had a presentation at BYU February 1st. And so I was prepping for that probably a month in advance. And that's when I came across this. I was looking at what resources does LDS.org have for parents. My topic was the 3 C's of why children look at pornography, and the 3 C's, how parents can respond. And I wanted to see what the church was also offering. And the first thing that came up when you search pornography on LDS.org is this landing page for individuals, couples, and parents to respond and learn about how to best react when pornography comes into a relationship in whatever capacity. And as I looked into the parent section of it, I was real excited about what was being explored and taught. So I wanted to share that with you. I spent most of my time in the parent section, and I've dabbled a little bit into the couples. And it sounds as though you've been in the individual side of things, Natasha. But I was pretty excited about the way that they were bringing in therapists and ecclesiastical leaders and young women's leaders and personal experiences. And so there's a lot of positive things that I was seeing in this, and then some things that I wish would change a little bit, but we can talk about those as we get into it.
Wonderful. Shannon, did you have an idea about this website, or are you kind of like me, just kind of joining the party?
Yeah, no, I'm just joining the party, but as I've been taking a look at it, I'm under the couples section, and I like kind of some of what they're doing. I'm sure there's some stuff that we'll find that they could be doing a little better, but this one that I'm talking about looking at right now is talking about emotions and just how to make sense of, this is the partner, them finding out how to understand their emotions, how to cope with the emotions. So I think this could be really helpful information for people.
Okay, good. So just so people know what we're looking at, it's a page on LDS.org, and it's called Addressing Pornography. It has several kind of pages associated with it: an individual's page, a spouse's page, parents, leaders, and resources. So we're going to kind of, briefly kind of go through some of these things. And what I'd like to do is maybe focus on the things that we see that are positive, and then maybe end with a few of the things that maybe we see as problematic or still could use some improvement, and then hopefully wrap it up. So that's kind of my plan for tonight. Does that sound good?
Sounds good.
All right. So under the individuals, one of the things that really popped up to me, which I thought was very interesting, was really normalizing, first of all, this idea of how oftentimes shame gets associated with this quote unquote problem, right? So people feel like they have a pornography problem, and that's in essence usually how we talk about it in our culture, which right off the bat is, sometimes you can have a self-fulfilling issue that, if you think you have a problem, then the problem exists, but that's kind of, maybe I should save that towards the negative end, toward the end. People will think that they have a problem with pornography, and therefore then have a lot of shame associated with that. And they had quite a few videos and quite a few kind of nice little excerpts really addressing how shame is not a helpful parameter to be addressing this issue through. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that when it comes to addressing shame, that was the number one thing in the parents section that was just getting me so goosebumped. I was just so excited because the majority of it were saying the first steps is, and Oaks has a wonderful quote about this in that section, that our first reaction may be to withdraw love, because then we can use it over here as a carrot, if you will, to be able to, and this is not his quote, by the way, he's not using carrots in his quote, but being able to say, okay, I'm going to withdraw love so that you stop what you're doing, and then I can bring my love back when I can trust and get us back into the place that we want to be, or we can withdraw love from somebody that's not doing what we think they should be. And Oaks, as well as a vast number of individuals on this site, have been talking about that creates shame. Shame doesn't work in making change. It only creates more distance, which is not what we want. It can create distance from feeling close to the Lord. It can create distance from family members. And I was just so excited to see that, because that is so true. If you create shame, if you withdraw love and you create it on a conditional level, it can create a lot of give up and a lot more secrecy. That shame just drives that secrecy. And so you may think someone's doing well, but they may not be telling you, which means they're not getting the support that they need. And it just keeps driving a cycle that isn't truly creating lasting change for someone that wants to make change.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Braxton. And I think if parents react differently and partners react differently, there's going to be so much more healing to be done. And what we know, and this comes up a lot in probably all of our practices and some of the other podcasts you've done, Natasha, but we know that it's a really cyclical pattern. And so a lot of times this is a behavior, and someone is maybe using pornography to cope with something, right? An underlying, maybe anxiety or depression or, OCD, something else. And when there's that shame piece involved, that usually elicits a negative response, right? So more depression, more anxiety, more of whatever we're trying to maybe work on. And so then they end up using, they end up doing the same behavior again. So looking at the pornography. So if we were to start to eliminate that shame piece, this would be, I think, extremely helpful for the community.
Yeah, and I thought it was really nice. They had a video of a young man, I think next to his wife, I'm assuming, and he talked a lot how just the reframe on moving away from, okay, today I'm going to stop this behavior and I'm going to go forward in a perfect way, from here on out, that would continually kind of fail for him, that type of approach, and therefore add to that shame. And just the reframe into, I can be, I can say, I'm going to work on this. I'm going to work on my relationship. I'm going to work on my life. I'm going to work on my goals and, addressing my values and what I want. Like that type of reframe for him was very helpful. So he said, I can be perfect in continuing to try. I don't have to be perfect in stopping the behavior right away. And I thought that was a really nice kind of wrap up to that shame video that I watched. So, and Wendy Ulrich, who I happen to know from a long time ago, she probably doesn't remember me, but I was in a student ward with her a long time ago when I was, we were the students and they were the cool older people. So they don't remember all of us students, I'm sure, but she's on there as well. And I have a lot of respect for her work. And she's written a book, something about how sin isn't mean weakness or something along those lines. I forget the name of her book, but she does a really nice job about talking about the difference between guilt and shame. And I think too, anybody who's familiar with Brene Brown's work also understands kind of some of those ideas that we can feel, remorse about something we've done, especially if it's something that hurts another person. That's very different from feeling badly about who we are as a personal, being. And I saw a lot of that being really pushed by, again, the ecclesiastical leaders, the therapists, and the people who they were interviewing on these little videos.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think, Natasha, and this is kind of going off on a little bit of a side note, but I've been doing a lot of work around shame and researching like how to treat shame and getting a lot more education. And it's very, very debilitating. So when you hear all of these experts talk about it, and so I think what happens is people get frozen, they get stuck. And so if we can actually move this to a healthier conversation and work on the shame, which sounds like you guys read more about it than I did, but they're doing on this page, it's going to be extremely helpful for everybody.
Yeah, really, really good stuff. Really like the shame stuff. I also liked how they talked about, one of the questions that you can kind of click on is, why does this keep happening? And, how long does it take to get over my pornography habit? And what do I need to focus on to overcome my pornography of habit? So all of those kind of titles represent that this is usually something that is repetitive in nature. This is something that usually people don't just experience once in their life, something that keeps coming up. And for some people, it might be every few months, it might be every few weeks, it might be a few times, a day even. So the spectrum, of course, of how often these things come up for people is widely varied, but it is repetitive in nature. And I liked that was normalized. And I also liked that they didn't seem to focus so much on answering those questions directly. What they seem to do instead is like, it's a journey, like it's a process. And, if you can focus again on some of these other areas of your life, you're going to probably do better than trying to, quote unquote, stop a behavior, which, we as Mormons can be kind of good at checklists and doing things or not doing things. And then we can kind of, add to our own anxiety feedback loop when we don't behave in ways that we wish would fall more or align more with our goals. Does that make sense?
Yeah. That was also reflected in the parent section, where if you're able to, what I really liked is they were creating more of a human look at the person. They're very focused on saying, don't see your child as this porn addict. Don't see your child as the problem. Don't focus on this so much. You want to help so much. If you want to help, make sure that you're not over focused on saying, well, did you look at pornography today? Well, how's it been this week? They love baseball. They love art and all these other things. Make them a complex human and a child of God again, not just this person that has a hard time and struggles with pornography. And they encourage asking questions to really get to the bottom of the problem, to be able to address what issues are going on in that person's life. In fact, there's a quote from Carol F. McConkie, who's the former Young Women's General President, or I think she's in the first counselor of the Young Women's General Presidency. But what she ends up saying in one of the videos is address the underlying challenge. Ask the questions that will allow them to describe their experience in a way that they can feel safe, that they can feel confident, that they are loved, and they can still be respected for the remarkable individual that they are. And that being said, just stuck out to me so intently, because we are asking questions for why is this pornography an issue? Like, why is this coming up at all? Instead of, oh, you looked at pornography? Well, now I know what that means. And so being able to step back from assuming what it means if a child or a spouse or even yourself are looking at pornography, we need to be asking these questions that really makes us understand, well, I'm a complex human and I love a lot of other things, and this is just one issue that I'm dealing with, and it doesn't define who I am all the way.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Braxton. That's one of the first things I do. And I don't see teens like you do or kids, but that's one of the first things I do with clients when they come in and they feel like they're struggling with this, is reminding them, trying to normalize it, and also letting them know, this doesn't define who you are. And this is just a behavior. Really trying to help them wrap their head around that. That's awesome.
Yeah, for sure. It's a small little blurb, and it's under the why do I feel so bad about myself title. But they do actually say at the very end, there could be physical conditions. They call it physical conditions, such as depression, anxiety. They even mention diabetes or thyroid problems that may impair. They're talking about that idea of being able to feel unconditional love from God. So I guess they're talking about like how our own framings when we're depressed or anxious or things like that. I'm not exactly sure I love all of that wording, but I think that there's something nice that they're at least acknowledging that there can be something more than just like a spiritual weakness, right? Which is, I think, how oftentimes these issues are very much talked about at church or in church settings. So there could be something physical going on. And especially those of us who don't adhere to the addictions model, this is one of the things that we're constantly critical of the addictions model of, is that instead of focusing on, getting to the bottom of the problem, like what's really doing a full-blown assessment, what's really happening, people just, oh, it's an addiction, and now there's addiction treatment, and they're not even really doing full-blown assessments. So I was glad to see some clinical language in here.
Yeah, I really like that too, Natasha. And I think if we kind of reframe it a little bit, that is what the three of us assess for. And when I think of diabetes, I think, well, it can affect your cardiovascular system, and that can affect erections. And so a lot of times that's an underlying cause for somebody who might be struggling with pornography.
Yeah, it's actually not uncommon for that to be a cause, because then it's embarrassing to be sexual with your spouse or something like that. So you look for other outlets and you're embarrassed to talk about it. So great point,
Yeah,
Shannon.
I'm glad that they're addressing some of that.
All right. So I think, moving on to the kind of spouses section, again, I think that there's a lot of potentially really helpful things here. So again, normalizing emotions. Why am I feeling such strong emotions? What's happening? There's, so they say that's a normal thing to feel. Am I to blame for my spouse's pornography use? So some very, good ideas there that this is not the spouse's fault. And again, kind of just moving into that realm of this being a journey, that, things of that nature. It's not the area that I looked at the most, just because I haven't had time to go through it all. But does anybody else want to say anything about the spouses section?
I found it really fascinating, jumping from the parents to the spouses, is that this is when they started to bring in more of the emotional and some people sharing their stories. So they'd have couples together, the person that was looking at pornography and the spouse that was telling their story. It tends to be the female-bodied individual is saying that they are the one that's been affected the most and talking about their process. And I really liked that it normalized the feelings. They were listing off these feelings that come into my office all the time. I felt alone. Why is God putting me through this? Am I not pretty enough? My whole world has been rocked. I don't feel like doing anything. Really experiencing some of those depressive symptoms or anxiety symptoms that can come through. Should I undress in front of him? Am I causing some of this? All these questions that can come up. So I like that they were normalizing feelings as well as individualizing the partner from the spouse. So the spouse is dealing with problematic use of pornography, and they were starting to say, you don't need to be identified as the spouse of, I don't think they said the word like the spouse of a porn addict or anything like that, but it was essentially saying, who are you? What do you like to do? And individualizing that individual. So I really like that. There was a couple things in there that were said, like I wasn't aware of a certified clinical partner specialist or a certified partner coach, but they were talking to a couple of therapists that were, I guess, certified as clinical partner specialists. The wording that they would use was very much on the addiction specialist line. So they'd talk about the addict or the partner that's relapsing and using words like that. And one person in one of the videos said, there's legit safety issues. And I was a little concerned. I wasn't quite sure what she was talking about. Where she's like, sometimes there can be legitimate safety issues. And I didn't go into anything more than that. And so I wasn't quite sure what she was meaning, is if there's legitimate safety issues of the partner offending their children, because that tends to be a common concern. And that's not backed up by any science that I'm aware of. So I would love to have them piece that out a little bit more, that I don't know of safety concerns unless there's partner violence that's going on.
But again, that wouldn't be the pornography's issue.
There's not a correlation there. Yeah, that's a little bit worrisome. I agree.
The only thing I can think of is, if they're downloading types of pornography that would be considered criminal, so child pornography or...
Is that still a safety issue, though? I mean, I guess if it's child pornography, there's some safety there.
Well, it'd be a safety issue for the legal status of that family. If now one parent is getting arrested and is, that would just, like, all of a sudden, completely challenge the family system. I guess that's how I see that. But yeah, safety in the sense of, I think that can be a big myth of addiction counseling, is that idea that people escalate into bad behavior just because they look at things that maybe don't fall in their value system. And we don't have any correlates for that in the research.
Yeah. And I think that's a really important thing to point out, Braxton. And I know that we've had conversations around this recently, but this can be really, really damaging for families when this belief is there that this behavior is going to escalate, or all of a sudden my children are in danger. And, I've seen alienation with kids because of it, parent alienation, nasty custody battles in court. And I think we have to be careful to maybe help clarify that for people, because the research does not support that.
Yeah.
At this time.
Okay, so moving. One thing I wanted to just it reminded me when you said that sometime in the spouse section, it seemed to be more female-bodied folks that were being, kind of in that stereotypical role of a spouse. But one of the things I really appreciated in the individual section was that they actually had quite a few females being interviewed as the person who was struggling with viewing pornography. So it wasn't just super male centric. So I really appreciated that, because it is something that both men and women enjoy doing. So we don't want to make this a one sex issue per se.
And Can I say one? Oh, go ahead, Braxton.
I was going to say I think the other thing to keep in mind is you're watching these videos with individuals that aren't, and they give the tag underneath each of the names, but someone that is giving their personal story and their personal experience. It's important. I would encourage people to take into it with a grain of salt if this was their experience. One of the things that one of the individuals said was, if you move forward, you can get through this if you go through with perfect faith. And I cringed at that, because we got the word perfect and faith, and there's not a way to decide what perfect faith is. Mm-hmm. And it can really lead to this thought of, oh, well, I would be through it already if I had perfect faith. And so taking some of those testimonials with a grain of salt and knowing we don't know what perfect faith is, and you're doing your best.
Thank you. Shannon, were you going to say something?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say with the couples section, it seemed like, and I didn't read it as thoroughly as you did, Braxton. I will after this, but it seems like they're really kind of focusing a little more on the couple, which I really like, because I think a lot of times what happens is sometimes this is viewed as, well, this is your problem. You need to fix it. You need to go deal with it. You've got the addiction. And instead of really taking a look at the couple and how do we help both people kind of progress and move forward into a healthier sexual relationship and relationship in general.
Yeah, it's fairly relational focused, I felt, both in the individual space, in the spouse space, and in the parent space. I thought it was all very much focusing a lot on, strengthening relationships, which I think is really great. Mm-hmm. Really great. All right. So moving into the parents, what can we say positively about this? Again, we kind of started off by saying that there was a lot of messaging about not shaming your kids. And I think it was very focused on lots of conversation. It was very conversation focused. Braxton, this seems to be the area that you looked into the most. So you want to...
Oh yeah, I probably watched the majority of the videos and read most of the stuff in this section, which is what got me most excited, because it was very much into, let's find out the reason why. Let's get support. This isn't a finite thing when your child has come across sexual imagery. There's more to the story. Let's find out that. Let's help remind them they're children of God, that there is change that can happen. Teach them values. Know that that this one time that they come and tell you, they're probably going to see it again. It's not an if, but when they come across sexual imagery. So be prepared and have this conversation and continue to have a conversation. So as they spoke about what to do with your children when they come and tell you, or when you find out, I thought there was a lot of really good ways of saying, give them love, give them what they need, keep connection, which is all something I highly agree with. One of the things that I did see come up frequently was this, the natural man is the enemy to God. And I always want to unpack that phrase, the natural man is an enemy to God, because I feel like it throws sexual desire, sexual health under the bus in a consistent way. Like, your sexual drive is an enemy to God. That's the translation that I see a lot with teenagers and couples and individuals coming to see me. So that got put out there. A lot of that scripture was referenced. And so I would be aware of that. I was concerned about that one coming up, of like, oh, okay, my sexual drive, I'm a high drive individual. Therefore I've got more, Satan's working on me harder. I've got this natural man. I just have to conquer it, versus understanding I have a high sex drive. And what does that mean? And how can I channel this or focus it, or also allow that I am a person that has this drive?
Right. And just be okay with that, that it's normal and healthy and part of your sexual health.
Mm-hmm. And how parents can address that with young kids too,
Mm-hmm.
because, we want to be able to protect them from this adult entertainment that isn't necessarily meant for them. And without sexual education really being readily accessible, that it can cause these thoughts and changes in what they expect in sexual health. But also knowing that, teaching them, hey, you've got a part of you that's an enemy to God. I think that can lead us back to that shame thing of, there's a part of me that is a natural enemy to God.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting that as the main message is to not be shame-based, it is interesting to pick out how we inadvertently sometimes are shame-based in how we even talk about it to begin with. That some of these problems begin with us as well, with our Mormon culture, our Mormon upbringings, our Mormon language around some of these topics. But I'd like to get that to a little bit more in the future when we talk a little bit more about the negatives. I'd like to end the parent one with, it says here, if we discover our children have been involved with pornography, we should respond with love. We may feel surprised, hurt, or disappointed, but responding negatively may increase our children's shame. Expressing love and teaching the joy of repentance helps our children feel strengthened and understand that they are worthy of God's forgiveness. That's a huge shift from some of the rhetoric that we've seen, at firesides at BYU, at priesthood, conferences, where the what I call the provocative language of kind of perverse and, evil, and all of these kind of ways that we've had some of the narrative in the past, in the very recent past, this is a huge shift. And so this I applaud with all of my energy, right, is to be able to say, not only parents, but I think all of us can respond in this way.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really beautiful.
The quote from Elder Oaks, I have right here, but this is what made me jump for joy when I was putting all this together. He states in the video, the very first remedy that should be applied is love, unconditional love. Love is the first commandment in a family relationship, and the ability to help or correct flows on the relationship established by unconditional love. I just love that it is the start of, if you want to support your child, you want to help somebody, love them unconditional, have that relationship with them. Don't pull it away.
Yeah. Yeah. And I wish, somebody like Oaks could, in that same, I know that we don't do well at this, but it'd be nice if he could say something like, I know that in the past I've spoken more harshly on these matters, and I want to, own that, and really let you know that after really looking into this, this is the direction that I feel is more helpful. That would be, I think, very helpful, to not make all the people who, have been listening to him for the past 20 years go, what the heck, who's this new person? Because this is not what was shared, in the devotional that I attended where he was speaking, or, things of that nature. So I think that's where sometimes the hurt can really be there for people who it's kind of a little too late. It's too little too late. They've already gone through the whole shaming process and the treatments and all of that really have messed up so many aspects of their sexuality in their lives.
Yeah.
I also think, Natasha, I feel like they're a little more proactive about it. Talking to your kids about sex, this says, will talking about this awaken my child's sexuality and cause problems? They say many parents fear that talking to their children about sexuality will awaken sexual behavior within their children. While this may be true in some cases, it's far better for children to receive information about sexuality from a loving parent than from other sources. So really promoting talking about sex with your kids, which is awesome.
Which takes me to the leaders page, which I also felt was that I found several kind of comments towards the bishops saying things like, remember that the parents are the ones who are responsible for the primary teachings around sexuality, and be careful too in worthiness interviews to make sure that you're not, becoming a sexual educator or asking, problems that would be too personal. So I thought that was really interesting, especially with all of the things that we've seen come to pass with Sam Young's movement and Protect the Children. And, that's an ongoing conversation that we're having, is whether or not children should even be in a closed door interview with an adult male talking about their sexuality at all, right? But at least there are some basic kind of directives here.
Yeah.
That put the onus more on the parents.
Yeah, I think it's a lot better.
All right. So I think that anything else that anybody wants to say as far as just really that they found very helpful or positive, and I'm sure this is not a comprehensive list. This is a lot of information on here, but I think in general, we thought there was a lot of really great stuff compared to what we've had in the past.
Yeah.
All right. So now let's talk about concerns, right? So kind of just even going through all of them again. Mm-hmm. So my number one concern, which I'm sure you both share with me, is that it's still very riddled in addictions language. So, just even from the relapse is an addict word, habit is an addict word, lots and lots of, kind of still moving in that direction. And plus their resources page, that's pretty much all that they offer.
Yeah, that's what I'm noticing.
Recovery type of treatments and things. So it's still very much in the addictions type of lens, which again, people should understand is not clinically sound or based in evidence, in research and evidence-based theory and clinical judgment. So that's a big problem. Any thoughts from the two of you on that?
I think I would just like to see a few more options for the recovery. Because I agree with you, Natasha. I think it's very much with kind of looking under one lens. And I think there's a lot more out there, and I don't think it's one size fits all. Sometimes I think this can be helpful for clients, and, they acknowledge that. And then other times it doesn't work, and then they have nowhere to turn. So adding some more resources, maybe from some of the other models, more how we treat clients when they come in with maybe out of control sexual behavior or problematic sexual behavior. That would be helpful for sure.
And it didn't, there were a few places where I felt like they actually made an effort. So like, am I to blame for my spouse's pornography use, which is what they say, is different than am I to blame for my spouse's pornography addiction, right? So There were areas where I think they made an effort to change some of the language, but it definitely wasn't there throughout. And it definitely wasn't there in a lot of the videos, because I think that they really interviewed a lot of people who follow the sex addiction model as well. Some of the therapists.
Yeah, I'd agree with that too.
Right.
A lot of the therapists there were highly focused on the 12-step model, the addiction model.
Right.
That's what the church offers, the 12-step model and things like that. So I can see where that was coming from, but I also think that that is problematic. We weren't seeing necessarily both sides on both camps of that. The other one is just that I know as a church, we don't necessarily question or create nuance as much. And I think that would be important to do as we watch some of these videos or look at them and say, okay, this is a blanket statement to try and cover 14, 15 million members that may be dealing with this issue. How might this pertain to myself? How can I look at this as, you said this, such as you need to have perfect faith. Well, that worked for her to experience. I put forth my perfect faith and it worked for me.
Yeah.
But using a word like perfect faith, and then when I say perfect faith, you think of what that means. I think of what that means, and it could be very different. So being able to tease out some of these words, if something is said there and you immediately get that pit in your stomach, or you're like, oh, I don't know, tease that out. Find out what about that was really difficult for you. It doesn't give you any encouragement to do that. So this would be coming from, Mormon Sex Info that you'd be able to question that. But besides that, I think that what you guys covered with the language and being able to question some of that as you're going through it, that there's a lot of supportive, great things there, but it is also not something to take in 100% as this is the only way to look at it.
Yeah. And there was a section here or there where they would mention something like every journey is going to look different, and every trajectory is, so they had a little bit of that type of message. I wish it was more prevalent, but I agree with you. I think in our culture, it's very classic to see people, especially people who suffer from kind of perfectionistic traits or compulsive traits or anxiety traits. They tend to take this stuff and run with it, right? And so now there's a whole new reason to shame ourselves is that I'm now not adhering to this, page on LDS.org or things of that nature. So yeah,
and in the individuals and couples section of it at the bottom, they do have stages. It's like stages 1 through 8, or this might be the first question you ask, and how should we respond here, and how can you respond here? And so they do set up stages, and you're not going to necessarily go through each one of those stages in that way. And in a couple of the videos, they do acknowledge that of like, you probably are going to experience many feelings of grief, and very similar. The stages are going to be different. Grief is going to be different. The feelings you experience may jump back and forth. So keep that in mind.
Okay. So my second critique is just basically that I think a lot of the problem has been created by us to begin with. So the reality is, whether we like it or not, the people who do not adhere to our same standards of sexuality and values within the Mormon culture do not have problems with pornography addiction. They just don't. So what we know from the research is that people who worry about this, people who think that this is a problem, people who talk about it as a habit or something that needs to stop, are generally people who come from religiously conservative cultures. And people who tend to feel badly about these kinds of behaviors are actually usually behaving in less of a frequency than people in the normal general population. So I just want to say that you can have all the values you want, and I'm not here to change people's values, but when we have a fairly kind of, what do I want to say? I hate the word rigid because I don't think it's rigid, but kind of like conservative or very like high standards around our sexuality, where there's not a lot of room for personal arousal or individual, fantasy or masturbation or things of that nature, then you're kind of setting up people kind of against their own wiring. And if you want to call that the natural man, again, that goes into shaming problems. And we just know that we're all kind of wired this way. So I just want to point out that some of this is of our own making. And it really, really gets my goat a little bit when I look at the spouses thing. And, the first thing is, where was it? It was, why am I feeling such strong emotions? And I'll tell you why, because we've taught you to. We've taught you to. We've told you over many, many talks that if your spouse is looking at pornography, this could end your marriage. This could be the end of your relationship. This is going to interfere in your intimacy, that this is going to be the way that your spouse completely berates you and objectifies you. And these are things that we have taught spouses. So now to say, oh, spouses, why are you having these strong emotions? I'm like, I think that we have taught them to respond very strongly to this issue and to be quite frightened and to have a lot of meaning. And not just Mormonism. I mean, I think in general.
This is Orthodox.
Yeah, and especially when we talk about female-bodied people, I think the general culture sets females up to be in competition with one another. So that whole idea of I'm not sexy enough, I'm not pretty enough, I'm not enough because of pornography is not something that you need Mormonism for. But again, that's part of a culture that teaches spouses to respond very negatively to anything like this. So those are my thoughts. I don't know what you'd both say about how much of it a problem it is to begin with, how much of it we contribute to making it a problem.
I think there's something that I would call out too, or that I was noticing, is that there's not a definition of pornography throughout all this that I've seen. If you see that, let me know. But I haven't seen that. And as we're bringing couples or individuals and they're saying, this is pornography affected my relationship so intensely. We don't know if they're talking about, like you said, the time. Was it once every 6 months? Was it once a year? Was it every single day, 4 hours a day, 10 hours a day? What was this? And what's the material, the sexual imagery they're talking about? Is it something they would see maybe on a very explicit website with videos? Are we talking Shopco magazines with the, underwear and bra specials? Because those are all along the spectrum of what would be considered sexually stimulating, and we have a reaction.
I've had that entire spectrum in my office.
Yeah, me too.
I have too.
LDS people, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And with the Orthodox, like you said, if you're not going to your spouse and they're not the gatekeeper of your sexual health, or your sexual desires, then all of a sudden, like you said, we react in a certain way. And we react the way that we've been taught to react. So we need to question when we're using the word porn, we're using it very flippantly. And I don't like it being used flippantly. When someone says pornography, it's, what are you talking about? What are we talking about when we talk about pornography? Because we all think of it in a different way.
Yeah, which I think, Braxton, you're making a really good point that there's places maybe they could consider using different language throughout this whole page, which is why we, really work hard to use sexual imagery, adult films, because we don't know what we're meaning when we're talking porn. And even then, in therapy, we're going to get very detailed about those sexual images and adult films because it's very different. And some of what I think you were talking about, Natasha, a little bit earlier is we all have very diverse erotic templates. And this doesn't, the church and the teachings doesn't always account for that at all. But the site doesn't either. And I think we have to be careful of that.
Yeah, and just to help the audience, what she means by erotic templates are what turns us on, right? Mm-hmm. And so everybody is very different in that regard. Yeah. And just to piggyback on both of you, I've been to presentations of therapists, where they will say, okay, everybody has a clicker and we're going to decide what is porn. And so they'll have a video, they'll have a little picture or whatever, right? And none of us agree on it. None of us clinicians agree on what is porn. And it's really interesting how even pornography, that word is defined by dictionaries differently and all kinds of things. So yeah, especially in a sexually conservative culture such as ours, a lot of things could be seen as pornographic, quite frankly. I mean, there's leaders, and I believe it was Elder Oaks, who called women who dress immodestly at church or around the, sidewalks or whatever, walking pornography. So you can see how even ourselves, we've had some issues with that terminology. And if it wasn't Elder Oaks, then I apologize to him, but I'm pretty sure it was. So. Mm-hmm. All right. Another thing that kind of stood out to me is this, there's one little tagline that says, "It was just one slip. Do I really have to tell?" Now, although I do like the focus on honesty, transparency, especially among spouses, things of that nature, there really isn't a lot of room here for sexual privacy. And in particular with parents, those kinds of relationships, and in particular with bishops, there just doesn't seem to be a lot of room for the potential that, it just seems like the advice is talk to your bishop, talk to your parents. I can't tell you how many people I have coming into my office from LDS backgrounds that have like in-laws involved and, adult parents to adult, it just seems like where's the sense that this is a sexually private matter that's really none of a lot of people's business. And if there's a concern or, is this out of hand or am I out of control? Maybe you go to a therapist who has very strict ethics and boundaries around confidentiality versus now. And it even mentioned about the word counsel being involved. And I'm like, in what world do we want the word counsel involved in people's very private affairs? Maybe the word counsel can be involved kind of on a macro level, like, are we going to have a fireside? Are we going to have some type of, conversation with the youth or something like that? But not in helping specific family members. And everybody now knows that people are dealing with these kinds of issues. So I find the boundary issue in Mormon culture oftentimes very problematic when it comes to confessions and what people consider sins and what people really don't understand around confidentiality, with well intentions. But now it's like your whole community knows about something that really isn't any of their business.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, you can't unknow what you know. I tell couples that when they come in and they're working through affairs or infidelity, this is something you have to be very careful of and clear about. Who do you want to tell? Because this information can oftentimes cause a lot of repercussions. And so we have to be really careful. And I think that there needs to be a conversation, especially when it's within a couple. That's a good place to start. Have a conversation first between the two of you, maybe several conversations before you decide who we're going to talk to about this. Because you both might have very different feelings on who you want to know. And I agree with you, Natasha. And I think part of the problem is the boundaries are so kind of skewed to begin with. Like we don't have a really healthy way of teaching sex education or about bodies or just sexual health. And so when something like this happens, I don't think people have a clue how to deal with it or what to do or where to turn, which is why I think this website is great. But I agree that could be something that would be really great to be added in, of maybe how to kind of actually address that when it comes out rather than involving everybody.
Yeah. I think to the Carrie Underwood song, I believe it's called Dirty Laundry, but no Ajax in the world's going to clean your dirty laundry. And the whole song is all about, you did wrong, and because you did wrong, I now get to tell whoever I want, whenever I want, and I don't need to edit anything. And I love what you're saying there, Shannon, and that when it comes to being able to say who you tell and what you tell, you can't take that back. And when you're hurt, we often act out real quick, and it's important to take a step back and say who really needs to know, what kind of support do we need. But that's what I'd go towards, is that we live in a community and a society that agrees that once you've been betrayed somehow, and this, for a lot of people, this falls under what they feel is a betrayal, that you now don't have any decisions that you can make, that you've already made your decisions. Now I get to tell whoever I want because I'm vindicated in that. And we need to step away from that as a society.
And I think, especially with minors, when they don't have a say, is really problematic. So kind of the parents who are kind of dragging the kid into the bishop's office, right? Or you really want to respect your child's autonomy, even though they're only 15 or 16 or 17. These are very personal things that they may or may not want to be talking to the bishop about. So, and I liked in the parents section, it did talk about, ask the kid what they think would be helpful for them. Don't just make assumptions for them. So I think there's room in this website to really include that. I have a comment from Matt Folmer. So hi, Matt, who must be listening to us. And by the way, Matt did an incredible job doing an interview with me just a week or two ago around his own kind of tragic experience going through addictions counseling for these types of same issues. So it was a very vulnerable, poignant interview, and I'd really recommend anybody to listen to that. Anyway, he says, one question I had was that the Old Leader Resources listed Dr. Hilton's book, He Restoreth My Soul, as a book to give people. I did not see it listed as a resource on the new site, and I hope they are moving away from the book. So that is an interesting observation, because that book isn't a good clinically based book at all. So hopefully that's kind of a passive way to, again, we don't necessarily come out and say, by the way, we gave you a wrong resource for many years. We just tend to slip them under the radar screen, kind of like The Miracle of Forgiveness and a lot of these books that are no longer published by Desert Industry, but nobody ever comes out and says, oh, by the way, most of the stuff you read in that was not very healthy for you to be reading. So that's unfortunate. All right, going back to the site, any other concerns or things that maybe I'm not coming up with in regards to things, areas of growth that they could consider, or just kind of flagrant things that we disagree with?
I think I've said most of the stuff that I found concerning where it comes to what is porn, really trying to piece apart the natural man. Man, that comes up so often in every one of the sessions that I get with, where we're saying, well, where is this coming from? And like, well, it's the natural man. And just like using the word pornography, what does that even mean? I know it's in scriptures, and I totally understand that I'm just calling out, and I can't remember the reference, but natural man is enemy to God and has been from the time of Adam. It's something that needs to be addressed and pulled and picked apart, kind of to understand what that really means for an individual. But besides that, for the website, I'm excited to keep exploring it. I've been fairly new to it. Obviously, it's only been around maybe 6 weeks, month and a half or so. Besides that, I think I've said my piece. All
right. Any closing thoughts for me, Shannon?
I'm just actually really excited about it. I think it's a really positive step.
I think, given our culture and our values as Mormons, this is a huge step forward.
Yeah, I agree. Forward. I totally agree. And I agree with everything you and Braxton said about what could maybe change a little bit.
Yeah.
And of course, I'd love to see just a giant site on sex education.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I think that's where it starts.
Amen.
And where they're interviewing certified sex therapists,
yes,
sex
everybody, yes,
therapists,
both sides. Yes, that was something I wanted to bring up, Natasha. Yes, that they would get input from both sides on these kinds of matters.
Yeah, I don't think that I saw a certified sex therapist on the show, at least not yet. So
I haven't.
Yeah, I saw therapists that, like I mentioned, Wendy Ulrich. I admire her work. She's a general therapist, but I haven't seen anybody that's certified by ASECT on sexuality. So that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us tonight for this discussion. Let us know if you have, feedback or insights as to the site, what you're finding maybe helpful or non-helpful about it. What did we miss? What did we get right? We'd love to hear from you. Again, please consider supporting Mormon Sex Info podcast by either subscribing to the site, which gives you access to all the podcasts in the past. And as it moves into more of a donation type thing, I'll make sure and give you directions on how you can do that. And there's also non-financial ways that you can support us by hitting the like button on the Mormon Sex Info page, Facebook page. You can share an episode that you feel might be helpful to family members or friends that you know of. And you can also write a review on the Mormon Sex Info page if you have any positive feedback to give us. So all of that would be greatly appreciated. Shannon, Braxton, thank you so much for your time tonight. I'm always in awe because I know your time is super valuable, and I just love having a little bit of it. I love you guys.
Love you too.
All right. We'll talk to you soon. Take care, everybody.